the cloud. All right, cool. Make sure all my things are off and we're ready to go. Thank you, Dr. Samantha Boardman. This is so exciting to have you join us today. We are talking about quite possibly like the thing that means the most to me and to the women in our network, which is women's mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being. And thank you for joining us. So to start, Dr. Samantha Boardman is a positive psychiatrist, which is, we're going to get into that, but you're also the author of a book called Everyday Vitality, which is right there. And you have a weekly newsletter called The Dose, and you are a busy working mother. So balancing all those things is something we can dive right into, because this is a really busy time of year for any working parent. And I just assume for everybody out there, this is a time where you feel a little bit frazzled. And how are you keeping it all together? And what is your best advice for those who are out there like me, sort of running around?
Well, it is such a crazy time of year, I think, for all of us. Wait, you froze for a second. Yeah. It's such a crazy time. And I think what the result, it's always a crazy time, I think always our heads are spinning. And I think as women, we're just putting out fires constantly. Life is a game of whack-a-mole. We're working, we're dealing with kids, we're dealing with partners, we're dealing, with our own parents, like so many different balls are in the air. And as a result, I think sometimes we sort of have this idea of, well, as soon as everything calms down, as soon as, I can take a breath of fresh air, then I'm going to start doing that stuff that's kind of meaningful to me, or that I would like to do more of, and engage more in this type of whatever behavior that is. And that we're sort of just moving the goalposts constantly then, especially on what feels meaningful to us. And so just for that specifically, I would say whatever, like the craziness and the head spinning that is happening, just do make sure that there is some prioritizing of something that is meaningful to you, that you're doing each and every single day. That is, I call it like delight hunting, because we're so good at fixating on what's negative, and our brains are attuned to that. It's like a hangover of evolution. It was really good to be hyper vigilant about everything that can, did, or will go wrong in our lives. And as a result, it's why that, your manager talks to you and like gives you a bunch of compliments and then says, there's this one thing I wish you had done differently. And that's what stays with us. Like that's what we carry. And just hanging on to any criticism rather than actually even hearing the compliment that just kind of goes right over our heads. But actually, it's a kind of priming ourselves and asking ourselves to focus on actually something that's good, like something that's delightful, something that's meaningful. And even sharing that with somebody else is really important, because once you share something that you've enjoyed, it actually imprints differently than when you just keep it to yourself.
I love that. In your book, Everyday Vitality, you talk about, you say there's 3 wellsprings of vitality. And these are things that like boost your confidence, give you energy, and make you feel alive. And they are, I would assume, outside of the everyday responsibilities of work or family or whatever responsibilities you have.
Yeah, no, I mean, because I think there's so much pressure right now to be happy all the time, or even kind of stress-free. And sometimes the wellness industry capitalizes on that and is telling us, like, if you buy this, you're going to be really happy. Or if you take 3, years off of your life. And obviously that's not a realistic option for anybody. This idea that you can either tune out or download or just buy stuff that's going to somehow ease your stress in some way. But what I was really interested in, and there was not a lot of literature that I had even studied when I was in medical school around this, but there was a lot of information, a lot of data in psychology, not psychiatry textbooks, though, looking in journals, looking at actually not just kind of what diminishes people's stress levels, but actually what makes them feel strong. How do you dial that up? What are the buffer zones? What are these protective factors that can kind of buffer and boost one, and even in the face of a lot of stress? And so that is kind of to go back to what these 3 C's are, I called them. It's in your connections, like actually feeling like you're having meaningful connections. A lot of people are very busy all the time and interacting with many people, but it doesn't mean that they feel meaningfully connected to others. You could be a room of 1,000 people, but feel incredibly alone, and very lonely as well. So what makes people feel connected is having those meaningful conversations. It's pausing, it's listening, it's feeling heard, it's being responded to, it's responding to somebody else, and having those, those connected feelings rather than just kind of those ships in the night feelings. I had a patient who would just say, like, I just asked my husband how he was doing 5 times, and I realized I just hadn't even listened, to his response. But even with our kids, just actually those kind of pause moments of when we're maybe driving in a car with them or walking side by side with them, having those deeper connections and not just talking about the weather or what are you doing tomorrow, what the schedule is. And then the second C is, feeling positively challenged in some way, in some domain of your everyday life, feeling that you are, in a space of flow where you're using your strengths to their full advantage. It might be in some hobby you have, it might be in something athletic that you do, to somewhere where you feel positively challenged. And that's really a competence booster. And then the third thing is how we feel like we're contributing to something. That's the third C, like how we're adding value. And one of the best antidotes we have for stress is actually doing something for somebody else, but not in a way that feels like drudgery. In a way, like, it's not like, oh, I've got to like do the laundry, but in a way that feels like something that actually feels meaningful to you. And we often think, there's a lot of studies looking at this about, even if we, if somebody gives you $5, if you spend it on yourself or somebody else, we often get it wrong. We think, oh, if I spend that money on myself, I'm going to feel a little bit calmer or better. But it's actually when we do something for somebody else that it gives us that boost. And also, which is kind of interesting, and one of our biggest stressors is time. I think every woman I know just wants like 10 hours more each day to help. There's just never enough time to do anything. And there's this idea of time famine, that we're all, just begging for more minutes each day. And how do we create time affluence? And one of those things is doing something for somebody else. And how do we actually even deal with time? But I can't remember her name, but she wrote a wonderful book on time management.
Famine versus time affluence. I've never heard of this. I love that.
It's cool. And she was also talking about this idea of time confetti, because I think our time is so splintered all the time now. It's like somebody's like thrown all this different stuff at us. And even suddenly, like, you have a meeting canceled and you're like, yes, suddenly you've got like 25 minutes to do something else. But often how we spend that time is like, oh, let's like go through Instagram or what's happening on Twitter or what's going on in the world. And actually with those time confetti pieces, really being deliberate about how you spend it, because that can also, like, if you can grab those little chunks of time and spend them more meaningfully and doing things that align with your values. And like, one of the things I ask patients to do when I first meet them is just, tell me the 3 things you kind of value most in your life. What are those? And it can take a while to think about. It can take a couple sessions to even come up with what those are, but it's something we don't, because we are living with this time famine, that we don't even take those moments to breathe and reflect upon. Is like, actually, what do I value? What do I stand for? What do I care deeply about? And then asking, okay, how do you spend your time? What did you do on Saturday, for example? Like, how did you spend that time? And then often there is a gap between what people care about most deeply and how they're spending their time or even their free time. And what we work to do is to create more overlap between the two, and that you feel like you're embodying your values, because that, no matter how stressed and how many demands there are on your time, when you create more overlap between what you care deeply about and what you value, and then actually what you do, when you feel like you're walking your walk, even when you are frustrated, you are disappointed, it doesn't take the toll that it does. Because as we know, stress it doesn't occur in a vacuum. It's perceived stress. And if you feel like you don't have the resources or that kind of buffer zone or that protective armor around you, it's going to be hitting you like darts a lot more. It's going to hurt a lot more than when you feel like you're embodying what you care about in your everyday life, even when it is stressful.
I love that idea, because when you are having a day or even a few hours where you feel like you're like killing it, where you feel like you're doing all the things that align with your authentic self, and you're doing well at work, and you feel like you're being a great mom, and you're like on top of the world, right? There's such a good feeling of confidence and value, and you just feel like you're doing a great job. And I think especially for women, when we feel stressed out and when we feel like we're not managing the time and we're not doing all of the things that we want to be aligned with, it immediately plummets what you think about yourself, what you think about yourself as a mother, as a worker, as a partner, a friend. It's like, instead of giving yourself the grace of saying, okay, I can get back into this place of realignment, it just takes a huge dive. And I hear from women a lot that, especially in this period of time where things feel incredibly overwhelming, and there's, you know, a huge amount of anxiety, and people feel like they're really just you know, burnt out, that we are living in the part where you are low, like you're low self-worth, you're low value, you're feeling really bad about yourself. And how do we get people back up to that place where you feel good, or give them the tools to be able to do that on their own? So you're not like whiplashed by forces that are out of your control.
Totally. And like what we call it is like closing that intention action gap, you know, because when there is that gulf in between, like what you kind of want to be doing, but actually then what you are doing. And there's a really interesting woman who's at NYU who's been researching this for most of her career. And she's German and she works at NYU, and she talks about creating WOOP goals, and it's WOOP. And the W stands for like, what is your wish? Like, what would you like to be doing? And maybe it's, you know, I'd like to be spending more quality time with my family. And then the first O is, what would the outcome of that be? Like, you know, just really kind of try to absorb what that would feel like. Like maybe I just feel more connected. I would feel less stressed. I would feel, you know, that, you know, that I'm being more present with my family, and just kind of to feel what that would feel like. And then the second O of WHOOP is, okay, what's the obstacle, you know, that's getting in the way of this? And it's like, well, maybe my phone is in my head every time we're together and I'm kind of half there, or even when we're eating dinner together. And then the P stands for, what's your plan? What are you going to do? And kind of be as specific as possible. It might be like, okay, when I pick my kid up from school, I'm going to, you know, I'm going to, my phone is going to be in my pocket or whatever. I'm going to turn it off. Or when I'm with my partner, it's going to be this way. Or if I get a break in the middle of the day and I have a meeting canceled, I'm going to go for a walk around the block and, you know, leave my phone in my office, or whatever that is. So really kind of being as concrete as possible and as action oriented as possible, because I think in sort of the world we live in, we've kind of created this idea that like happiness is all in your head. And it's also all up to you as an individual. Like it's all on you. And if you're not happy, there's something wrong with you, you know? And actually just kind of taking some of that stress off of the individual, and also this idea that it's all what's going on in your mind. And actually it is in what's known as like our behavior activation. What we do really affects how we feel. It's not just the other way around. And I think traditional psychiatry has been really kind of looking at people through that idea of your emotions and your feelings affect what your behavior. But actually we also know it goes the other way. Your behavior can also really affect how you feel. And just those little things, if you're having a stressful day and you're sitting at your desk, like you might just kind of be like, I'm just going to double down and just plow through this and do that. But it is in those moments of actually just physically moving, standing up, you know, going to like getting some fresh air, going outside. And instead of, you know, taking those breaks that are going to give you CPR, because I think taking a phone break is not going to give you kind of that same like you're not going to feel as vital. It's kind of a vampire vitality than if you would, if maybe you went for a walk, you called your friend, you know, your best friend who lives in California, and you know, left the context that you're in, you spend 20 minutes doing that, and then you come back to it, you will feel measurably better. Same thing, just physically moving. We know you don't have to like put your jog bra on and sneakers and hit the gym, just going for that, like even, you know, a casual walk, like what they call incidental ambulation, really changes people's moods. But it's going to be, you're going to have like a more powerful impact if your phone's not in your hand and you're not kind of like, you know, going through it as you're walking. I just lost.
Just lost wonderful Jenny. I'm sure that she will be back on in a moment. Just check in with her. We're very pleased to be hearing your words and intel. And I will say I'm just a few chapters into your book, and loving it. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
Touch base with Jenny, but happy for you to continue in her absence.
Yeah, no, I'm really deeply interested in like the little things that we can all do to just basically have a better day, and to feel less harried and less hassled. And when we were speaking before in preparation for this, I had talked about how if I'd had a magic wand to wipe away kind of the guilt that working women often feel, that they're kind of doing things halfway, and that they're never enough in any domain. And what are there's so much reassuring research out there that shows that the kids of working moms are actually thriving. They are much more open-minded about gender roles, that they are doing great. So I think all that guilt we often feel that maybe we're not, baking the cookies for the bake sale, that actually it's okay, and the kids are going to be just fine. That watching us even struggle. And there's a lot of really interesting research out there too that shows when kids see their parents really work hard for something, even kids as young as 2 years old, even if they give they see a parent struggling with trying to open up a box, and if the parent persists and struggles, that then the child, the toddler, is presented with something that's hard to get a toy out of, they're much more likely to persist if they've seen their parent really work hard at that. And I think that translates a lot and generalizes is when we see our moms and our dads. Hey,
what just happened? So I'm sorry. My internet.
I'm banging on.
I'm glad you're just talking, because my internet just went out and came back. This is the first time ever.
It is the first time. I'm really have been enjoying what Dr. Boardman has just been speaking about those. So that point in your book really resonated with me, even though I'm not a parent. So please continue. Thank you.
Oh no, I'm just talking about actually just how it's okay, I think, to share. I think sometimes we're trying to protect our kids from what we're going through and what's hard. And, it actually, kids really benefit from seeing their parents, working hard at something that's outside of them. And we're actually doing our kids a favor by not making everything about them as well. And I think this whole professionalization of parenting has made it more stressful on parents, but also it's not necessarily beneficial for kids either. But just going back to the working, what are those sort of everyday things? Sorry.
I think that we just let Jenny's internet situation figure itself out as much as possible. Are you able to hear me?
I totally hear you. Absolutely. So
You're super clear. So please continue for our wonderful audience. This is great.
Absolutely. It is revenge of the internet. Well, just Jenny and I actually had a conversation, in preparation for this, also kind of thinking about what are the tools that we could give people that might be interesting. And Jenny mentioned earlier this whole idea of kind of being one's authentic self. And while that does feel good when we're sort of doing, we are in every way, we are, embodying what we care about. But at the same time, I think there can be a lot of pressure to just be this idea of finding one's true self, and that requires a lot of burrowing in and self-reflection, and that sort of immersing oneself in one's emotions, and that can really lead to rumination. And as women, that we can kind of, that fixation, it's almost like that ticker tape going through our minds of like imagine watching like The Crawl on CNN, like, why'd you do this? Oh, this is coming up. This is going to go badly. And what are those things? What are those tools we can use that actually can interrupt rumination? One is actually just being in nature. So if you do live near a park at all, just to go outside, it actually literally quiets rumination in the brain. It's incredible. And I think there's a lot of evidence that we have nature deficit disorder, and how calming nature is, and how it really does buffer and bolster and boost our mental health. And it can be just 10 minutes. Even just getting a plant and putting it on your desk can help. We even know people who are recovering from surgery that they require less pain medication, and they recover more quickly when they even can look at a tree. So just to keep that in mind, but also to interrupt rumination, going back to this idea of being authentic, is to be what we called like a well-intentioned phony. And that's not being fake or being like what my stepson would call like a narp, not a real person, but actually sometimes thinking about role models and people who we admire, who are exemplars for us, and thinking, hey, what would Jenny do in this moment? Like, how would she handle that? And that can help us, especially when we're feeling really stressed and immersed in whatever's going on in our world, and it all feels like it's coming in on us, is imagining, okay, and it's almost like a snow globe and somebody's shaking it up. But what helps us kind of gain perspective is thinking of somebody you admire. If it's I had a patient who would think about Michelle Obama, like, what would she do right now? And that can actually kind of lift us out of ourselves and help like us sort of gain perspective. Another really, there's a lot of data behind this technique. It's called self-distancing, and it kind of helps distance you from like those consuming hot emotions, is thinking about like, what would your future self say to you right now? So you're sort of time traveling. Another thing you could do is think like, what would I say to a friend right now? What kind of advice would I give them? And immediately there's a different kind of clarity that we have. And, this is called King Solomon's paradox. Apparently King Solomon was wildly smart and wise, except and giving advice to others. But when it came to himself, his like sort of private life, he was a train wreck. And what is it? Why are we able to have perspective around others, but not with ourselves? And don't worry, hi, we're talking about rumination and self-distancing.
I'm so sorry. I have no idea what just happened, but are sitting in my son's room. So hi, and it seems to be working in here.
Well, this is actually a great, I actually think this is all about, cognitive flexibility and agility. And we all need a little bit of some cognitive wobble to kind of remind us to how to deploy our skills of resilience. So I think this is very well suited.
Well, I want to go really quickly to some questions that I have, since Kiki has stepped in very nicely to ask her questions. But my question is really going back. I really like what you touched on before about happiness, and how there seems to be what I think of as like a happiness industrial complex right now, where people feel almost like pressure because there's so much out there on like the wellness and mindfulness, and all of a sudden if you're not, it feels like if you're not able to have happiness at work and have happiness in life and keep yourself at this like very high level of like optimized joy and feeling balanced in your own body, you're doing something wrong, or you're somehow failing. And I hear about it, like I did something yesterday on TikTok about this, because even companies, they're like investing heavily in wellness and how their employees are going to be so happy coming back to work. And it seems irrational, and also not really logical to think that everyone's going to be happy all the time at work if we just sit around, with snacks and programming, and you're going to be happy at home. And we're living in a time that's so scary and uncertain. How do you balance feeling this pressure to be on and be happy all the time and be positive when you don't actually feel that way?
Yeah, I think like there is this intolerance of anything that isn't smiley faced and rainbows and unicorns, this idea that everything's got to be sort of smooth sailing. And I think it was a professor at Stanford who had called it duck syndrome, this idea that we keep seeing other people who look like they're sort of skating smoothly across this flat pond, but at the same time, we're not seeing that their legs are moving like wildly and madly beneath them. And thinking that everyone else has got this sort of smooth sailing kind of duck, serenity going on, and that actually we're not really seeing what's happening beneath the surface and how people are struggling. I don't know, this is probably not reassuring, but there's a lot of research out there that we do seem to assume other people are much happier than we are, because we only see sort of people's highlight rolls, especially with social media. Nobody, even when they're sort of just woke up like this kind of thing, it's usually so airbrushed in every way. And this idea of this kind of fake perfection that is presented to us, and we're seeing that young women, perfectionism's really on the rise. Just this idea that not only do they have to look perfect and have perfect social lives, obviously they want to feel perfect professionally, also an intolerance of imperfection in others, wanting others to be perfect all the time. And it is, I think, incredibly generous when we see our role models, pull back the curtain a little bit and share, actually, this is really, really hard. This was so tough for me doing this, or I am struggling and I am really stressed out. When I was writing my book, it was really, really hard for me. It took me a long time to get it done. And I had so many people I admired who had just fired these books out and taken leave. In 6 months, they had these bestsellers. And I was really sort of in the depths of oh my gosh, where am I going with this? And Angela Duckworth, who had written Grit, that was a wildly a terrific runaway bestseller. And I just assumed Angela had just kind of plopped down one weekend and fired out Grit and then went back to research and teaching. And one day she sent me this email, and it's the attachment to her original proposal for her book. And she was like, Sam, I cried every day for 2 years. And you've got to see, this is my bare bones proposal. And it kind of sucks, huh? And honestly, it was the most generous thing she'd ever done, because there was a couple of bullet points, I'm going to write this thing about grit. It's kind of this idea of when you work hard in the face of negative feedback. And it was this skeleton of an idea that was, germinating. And I have to say, it was one of the most generous gestures, having somebody I knew do that, because I had just thought Angela, who lives on this pedestal of brilliance, had probably had such an easy time doing something. And actually for her to share her kind of blood, sweat, and tears that had poured into this was so generous. Are there any anyone out there, if you're having a hard time, I guarantee you there are many, many people you are so not alone in this. And for anybody who's had a hard time and maybe feels that they're on the other side of it, to share that experience, with somebody else. And sometimes I think we think that it's maybe psychiatrists that have all the answers. They really don't. It's one another. It's our communities that do. And I think that we find such that those are the reservoirs, those are the wellsprings of our vitality, and these connections, and having these tailwinds and that invisible support from people who've shown us that what was difficult for them, what helped them navigate that. And we have so much to learn from one another, than I think thinking that we have to buy something or download something or move to India and eat, pray, love our way to joy.
It's almost instead of happiness, it's truthiness.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
So you don't have to spend all your time just focused on no, I'm so happy, it's great. And you can just lead with the, where you are. I mean, obviously you don't even want to word vomit all your feelings on a platter, but it's more the connection of that, which is one of the C's in your book, the connecting with other people and having a place and a forum. It's one of the reasons why we do these webinars, because we have this huge group of women, and it's a way for us to be able to get together and learn from each other, or learn from experts, and talk about where we are. And I welcome questions. So if people have questions they want to put into the Q&A, go ahead, we'll ask it for you on your behalf. So we appreciate your time and your thoughts on this. And I mean, I could ask you 12,000 more questions. I mean, I think there's so much pressure on women right now, and you talk about like PTSD and happiness as part of your positive practice and in some of the things you discuss. I wonder if you think like, are we in the PTSD world right now of COVID, or are we still like in the COVID world where it's not even trying to put it together and figure it out yet?
I think we were all hoping, I think we're all storytellers. We wanted to be like, there was this beginning in March of 2020, and then there was this middle, and then there was an end, and we're kind of waiting for the ending, as that's the way we tell stories. And this idea that there's this long, long, long tail of whatever this kind of this liminal, this penumbra that we're kind of inhabiting of weirdness, of what's going on. But I do think if that's where it is, we started with that kind of as soon as kind of mindset that we have to be really careful about. But also this notion of how are we handling negative emotions, and because we were talking about how we're sort of intolerant of them, and I might think of myself as a positive psychiatrist, but I'm a big believer in leaning into negative emotions, feeling them. There's actually research out there showing that people who either kind of, rationalize negativity, you can be like, oh, a student gets a C on a test and be like, that teacher is just so mean or whatever. Or you could, the rationalization of like, I got a bad review from my manager, like maybe they're just like, they just don't like me or whatever. Not dealing with those emotions that then when we're presented with another challenge, we don't necessarily learn from them. So actually leaning into those emotions, feeling them, this is data. It's a data point. It's nothing beyond that. So rather than kind of trying to sweep them under the rug, that I think, when we don't feel like we have enough time or feeling frazzled, how can we sit with them? How can we learn from them? And then, rather than just quickly trying to like, let me move on, let me put that smile back on my face, that fake smile back on my face, and sort of move past that. And I think it's important to feel those feelings. And even, there's emotional granularity, as a language psychologist use around this, is actually putting a label on them. Like rather than that kind of blah, I don't feel good, or like, I just feel like I'm in a bad mood, being as precise as you can about what that feeling is. Like if you're kind of in a bad mood, be like, what is going on? Like, why am I feeling this way? And even whipping out a thesaurus if you need to be as precise as you can about the language you're using to describe that. Because it almost helps you put like police tape around it, and it doesn't feel like this kind of blah cloud following you. And what's important about being really specific and precise with your language there is it kind of, it stops you from feeling paralyzed by it, and it gives like sort of that pathway to action. Like, here's what I can do about this. And this is something that I can handle. And what is the action that I can take for this? Also, I think allowing for what we all have, but I think we don't consider enough, is this idea of emo diversity, like that we can feel stressed out and, happy at the same time. These emotions that we can, that people like, how are you? I'm good or I'm bad. I'm happy or I'm sad. Like that I'm strong or I'm weak. These can exist side by side. And looking at, there were these studies from the late 90s looking at caregivers of HIV patients, and those who were able to kind of actually find that laughter within their sadness, who were able to sort of notice something that was amusing and share it, even within this tremendous challenging time, who were able to hold those emotions side by side. And it's something that we don't allow for enough. And I think we have almost this binary bias when it comes to how we're feeling, and just assume that it's kind of black or white, and that that nuance and those shades of gray that we don't allow for, and almost feel guilty about, if we're not kind of just able to like, if it's not like we're good or we're bad, like everything. I think Jerry Seinfeld did some whole thing on that
all the time, because that's what I'm being told I have to be.
And even in that kind of gritting our teeth, the grinning and bearing of it is really like not helping us in any way. But so how can we digest and metabolize those negative emotions? How do we learn from them? How do we use them as information? And then we can move on from them, or move forward with them, rather than, I think we've pathologized the idea of feeling bad. I mean, even I had a patient who was grieving her. She had lost a grandparent a couple of months before, and she like felt this pressure. People were kind of like, "What's wrong with you? Snap out of it," like get it over. And she would have really good days, really happy days, and then something would hit her, like, oh, like she'd want to call her grandmother, and like kind of in that weird liminal space around grief where you're kind of reorienting yourself to thinking of someone in the present, to thinking of them in the past, and that like gasp of like, oh wait, I can't. And then having, that it would weigh heavily on her too, but that and then this pressure on top of that to like, how come you don't want to come out with us? It's going to be really fun. Like, why are you being such a Debbie Downer? And that pressure to be happy that I think, obviously was really making her feel even worse.
Women internalize so much guilt and shame and pressure upon themselves as well, like the shoulds.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we talk about that.
That's like a toxic word. Should.
It's funny. Chris Peterson used to call it stop shoulding on yourself and stop shoulding on others. And I think it's really goes hand in hand with, he would also talk about having a butt-free day. Like if somebody comes to you and says like, oh, isn't this great? And how I think oftentimes we do feel like we have to be the voice of reason, like be like, yes, but, and just try to just bite your tongue a little bit before that but follows everything. And because again, it's kind of always pouring, water on someone's fire.
I think this is like, I am a relentlessly optimistic person and positive, and so I can sort of flip things into a positive place, even when it seems crazy. But like, to me, I think the silver lining or the positive side of this whole pandemic and having it go on for actually so long and not having the end that you are like, people are searching for, is that because it's gone on so long, it actually is forcing people to confront a lot of things that if it had been, 6 months, a year, 2 years, we would have been like, okay, well now we're done and move on. And I hear from a lot of people, it's like, it's gone on too long. You can't actually go back to, or you can, but it would be unhealthy, that people are being forced to confront a lot of the things that have come up that they wouldn't have done otherwise. And so it's like, oh my gosh, my anxiety's out of control. And all of a sudden you're like, I have to deal with this, or I'm so unhappy, I have to deal with this. And then all of a sudden you're on this other path where you're looking at what are the things that made you unhappy? Why are you not going after the job that you want? Why are you so overwhelmed by, life, family things? How do you find the connections in the space? Because this is, it's like, it hits a point where it's almost like untenable anymore. You just can't do it. And you're actually forced to change your life, change your mindset, change your emotions. And so if nothing else, that's actually, I think, a good thing. It's like having to confront what you were saying, those emotions that you are negative, that you're uncomfortable with, that are unsettling. You have no choice to deal with it. For a while, you could have made a choice. You could have made lots of excuses, but there's almost no choice anymore unless you just like really want to live a miserable existence.
It's so true. And there's a lot of research around that too, looking at it's only when we're forced, they call it like the forced experimentation effect, to do something different, is that's when we'll do it. Even if we are like, somebody can give you all the information in the world, and it's why sometimes education isn't always the answer, because it doesn't necessarily change behavior. It's only when we're forced to do something differently that then we're like, oh yeah, maybe I'll do that,
Do you think that that's like going to wind up being in the long run a good thing for society and humanity?
I mean, again, I do think it's a both and, like I think we've all, been in the same storm, but people have been in different boats, like it's been so different, and it's really hard to generalize. I hear, I had a patient at the beginning of the pandemic who I was really worried about, and, had a lot of anxiety, and she'd been treated, like I'd been treating her for a long time, and I was so worried, and I was just kind of figuring out Zoom. It was mid-March, and we get on a phone call because I can't get the Zoom thing to work, and I'm so worried. And she tells me, she's doing really, really well. And I was like, I'm so glad to hear that. What's going on? She's like, I've been so busy. I've got all of these people I know who've never had anxiety before, and they're having a really hard time. And I have so much advice to give them. And this is like, I've been waiting for this, frankly, all my life. And I am like in this position of, of being a giver and knowing what to do. And I've got all this advice to deploy, and I know all these strategies, and I'm really being helpful. And, so I think that, like, for somebody like her, and she actually, it was really and it has been, and it's kind of remained that way, this sense of empowerment. And I think that this idea of many people reporting that they had a renewed appreciation for, their close relationships. People were worried there'd be this, there'd be many divorces, and that hasn't happened. People saying they have, renewed priorities, a renewed sense of their personal strengths or what they do, and renewed like appreciation for the other people in their lives. So I think there have been, rather than this kind of, again, binary, like it's all bad or all good. I think we can have that both and there too. And for some people, certainly, like, I think maybe have even experienced growth as a result of it. But I think there's also people, many who've had, serious trauma. And, we know that they say that for every person who dies, 9 people are grieving for them, so the numbers just keep going up. And so we have a lot of people who are grieving and who, are obviously really, really struggling. I mean, I think sometimes the impulse is, I think when people are challenged or are not feeling their strongest, is to remove all challenges from them. And how do we actually give them the tools to navigate the challenge? It was what I'm optimistic about, that we can do that.
I meant to ask this at the beginning, but I forgot. How would you describe positive psychiatry? Because I love just even the title of what, and how is it like specific or different than the other versions of psychiatry?
Sure. Like, I mean, positive psychiatry is, well, I'll tell you how I got here, and that's how I can explain it. It's really, I had been out of medical school, and I had done my residency, and I had been treating patients for quite a long time. And a woman who I'd been treating had a lot of anxiety, and she was feeling overwhelmed with her family, and she'd worked as a lawyer and had stopped working, but she was doing some pro bono work. And she had some anxiety, some symptoms of depression, but not fully kind of checking every box there. And I'd seen her for about 6 weeks, and she comes to my office one day and just says, "You know what? I sometimes just hate coming here. All we ever do is talk about kind of what's wrong in my life." And that's kind of the main focus. And we never talk about anything else. And she wasn't wrong. I had been so well trained in like kind of symptom management and conflict, kind of resolution, and kind of how to dial down misery. That was my expertise in many levels, but not really thinking enough about kind of what made life worth living for her, what was meaningful to her, what she enjoyed doing, what elevated her. And it prompted me to go back to school and to study positive psychology, which was learning about optimism and resilience and post-traumatic growth, and really the science behind them. I'd rolled my eyes before. I'd come at that with a lot of skepticism of, this is the rainbows and unicorns and smiley faces. And really, I recognized that my approach had been all about pathogenesis, which is the study and understanding of disease, and not salutogenesis, which is the creation of health, and how they can go hand in hand. You can help somebody find wellness within their illness, and you can help them find strength within their stress. And so that's why I think of myself as a positive psychiatrist, because I'm not minimizing the symptoms or the challenges, but I also think that it's important to also focus on the other, like the unbaked side of that pie that I think I had not been looking enough at.
Yeah, because it's like you've got to dive deep, but then you've got, it's like, what's the end game? The end game is being positive and being happy, and coming up with a strategy to elevate your spirits. So I love that. I think it's a great title, and I applaud you for diving into it and putting that out into the world. And your newsletter, tell everyone about your newsletter. We're going to put it out there on the blog as well, but I just want to make sure everyone sees it. I think it's really great. The information you're putting out is really interesting and useful, because it's like nuggets.
Thanks. I mean, I think there's so many smart people, especially a lot of women. It's mostly women who read it. And
there's lots of smart people, but you're putting out something really interesting and unique. So own it.
Well, no, thank you though. And so I just really wanted to be able to share this with, this research. They say in general, I think it's 3 people read a scientific paper, and that includes your mother. So the idea that like there's so much fascinating research out there. How do we share it in actionable ways that is, translatable into people's everyday life, that I could I could put out there. And that was really my goal with this newsletter, is like, here's the data, look at this science, like this has real like life relevance for you, do what you want with it. But I really wanted to make it actionable for people and who are curious about the stuff, but don't have time to sit down and read, go through a 20-page research study though, and show like, this is what's out there. Maybe this will be helpful to you. Maybe it'll be helpful to someone you love or someone you know. Maybe it'll be helpful, like, in your workspace, maybe in your home life, whatever that is. And so that's really kind of the idea behind it. And we've gotten a lot of great feedback and really engaged followers and people comment on it. And I love, and also people sending me stories about what's going on with them and really inspiring or saying, please write about this or that, like writing a lot about relationships, a lot about work. And really also trying to debunk some of those myths out there around, like, I think that happiness industrial complex you mentioned as well.
Yeah, I think that's great. What's the one thing you're hearing most about work? And then I'll let you go. But what's the one thing people are asking you most about with work, or, because are most of the people that you work with women?
Yes. Yeah. I didn't intend it to be that way. That's like just somehow where I ended up. And I'm very happily that way, but just people having a hard time, I think, in the work, going back to work, how much that kind of hybrid, that how much they want to be in the office or not, that's like a source of stress, or how much they feel like that's a lot of shoulding, like, should I be there in that place? A lot of also around their social lives, a lot of people feeling super overwhelmed with reentry, feeling kind of that social hangover of what it's like to be to feeling obligated to kind of go out again and feel totally normal doing it. And really, I've been advising people to really cherry pick what they spend, like not to just go all in, but like, what do you really feel like doing? What's meaningful to you? Instead of going to that cocktail party for 80 people, maybe go to that dinner with 6 friends where you can have a meaningful conversation, because something that gets bigger than that, it's going to be hard to do that. And really being deliberate about moving forward, like, what are some of those, what have you taken away from this period of time? What have you decided that you actually like more about your life? How can you integrate that into your life moving forward, rather than just kind of being in like default mode and, just passive and letting it all happen? I think oftentimes what really is depleting for our vitality is feeling like a tumbleweed, and you're sort of everybody else's whim and everyone else's schedule, and being as deliberate as you can about what is meaningful to you and putting those values front and center, and really kind of job crafting your life around that.
I love it. I love all of this. I can't thank you enough for taking your time to do this and riding this ship while my internet went down, which I figured out what happened. Whenever I said my 12-year-old was going to, he came in with like 10 friends and they were all playing video games and on their like various devices. I think they sucked all the Wi-Fi away from us for a while. And then they left and ran, the Wi-Fi came back. So there you go. We can thank them being out of school for our technological snafu. But I really appreciate it, Kiki. Thank you for stepping in as well. And this is just like, I love hearing different strategies that people can employ and different ways in which you can think about using this time when you're feeling maybe like a boat that's at sea and not in control, being able to like write it and being smart about it and having, the thoughtfulness to prepare for a future that, although I guess what you're saying is don't actually prepare for the future. Just do it now. Do it now. There's never a future that's going to be better. This is the moment.
This is the moment.
Figure out how to like steer the ship now and whatever waters are in the future, so that you are in a place that is successful and feels really strong. I love it. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Jenny. And thank you, Kiki. I really appreciate it. Really, thank you. It's an honor to be included.
Thanks.
This is a pleasure.
Loved this one. See you guys next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.